Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Don Zavis, National Sales Trainer, Sales Coach, and I am here with our wonderful group of Tucson Paranormal Society. We appreciate you joining us for Inside Tucson Paranormal. This is a wonderful show that we have for you today, and it's totally a privilege to bring great paranormal content to the people of Tucson, and really now because we're on the internet, the entire world. So it's really a great opportunity we have. We've got a wonderful speaker today, Chuck Swedrock. Chuck was actually one of the speakers for one of our Third Friday events. Have had an opportunity to interact with him for a few times, and just a kind of an incredible group that he's part of, an incredible story. And I think nowadays we've got this interesting merge of science and paranormal that really makes it well. So Chuck, I would do a terrible job if I tried to introduce you with all the things you have. So I'm going to defer that to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Don, for this opportunity. So, all right, you handed the ball over. Is that the point? I can take it from here.
Chuck, we had a little technical hiccup. You still with me?
Yeah, I'm with you. Do you want to do an intro, or do you want me to take start? Hello? Don, are you there?
So let's have you go ahead. Like I always say that I always do such a terrible job when I introduce anyone because I either forget stuff or anything like that. So Chuck, why don't you kind of share with our listeners who you are, what you are, kind of, what's happening in your world and what brings you into the world of the paranormal.
Okay, good. Thank you, Don. Thank you for this opportunity. Where to begin? Actually, I'll offer there's a YouTube out there that kind of has the early part of my life story, including, I guess the most significant paranormal event, you would call it, was happened to me after an out-of-body experience after my brother's suicide. But that is on a video. If you go to YouTube and put in the title, "A Life Guided by Experiences," a dash in my name, Chuck, and that's Swedrock, SWED, 1E, SWEDROCK. So that'll give you an opportunity to kind of take it more leisurely. I'm going to jump in from that point after that video where I did have a near-death experience of my own, but it happened, in 2002 when I ate some granola cereal and bad grapefruit juice, and I threw that up. My esophagus had been damaged, and I was drafted in 1964 into the Marine Corps, and I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina for 21 months, and that ate up my digestive system. And that led to that near-death experience in 2002 because I had to have the esophagus stretched. It was weak, and the granola cereal tore a gash about 1.5 centimeters in my esophagus. And I bled out all morning, not realizing it was bleeding, and then all of a sudden, lunchtime, it all came up. My wife at the time pinned me against the sink and called 911. The paramedics got there, and they were kind of casual. "Oh, yeah, we got somebody who threw up some blood." And they saw the volume. They changed their demeanor. But me, being aware of this paranormal arena, I thought, well, maybe I'll have an NDE being loaded into the back of an ambulance. Well, be careful what you ask for. Ambulance went down the road a ways, and then I'm out of my body. And I could care less about that package of meat on the gurney beside me. And I'm in the conscious state, which is drawing the universe. And there's no sides to the ambulance or anything. But I am focused in my attention on the medic and the driver as they exchange the following conversation. The medic said to the driver, can you can you find a parking lot, pull over and stop? I don't have any blood pressure and I can't get the IV started. And so the ambulance driver said, no problem, put on the brakes right there in the middle of our side of a 2-lane highway. Everything blaring over the ambulance. And I thought at the time my wife was in the front seat, but it was a haze. I couldn't see the identity there. But turns out later when I checked with her, she was actually in the car behind us, following with our car. So when the ambulance stopped in the middle of the highway, she had to stop. So that was verification of the experience from that point of view. Anyhow, after that point, the paramedic, after the ambulance stopped, was able to get some blood pressure going, like pumping on the chest, and put the IV in the wrist, and then boom, I'm back in the body. Now, my consciousness wasn't there. I didn't have consciousness regained for a couple of days, because it turns out they had to give me 4.5 units of plasma. So I had nearly half a tank of the blood gone. And
oh my God.
That's about as dead as you can get. And I guess from a physical point of view. But I had this conscious trip, but I didn't bring any memory of the extra part of it back. And I think that's because I'd been given spiritually what I was meant to have in order to have the role I had going forward, working with this field of near-death experiences and out-of-body consciousness from the point of view.
So I have to ask this question. So when this was happening, did you feel like, when you were looking around, were you conscious of the fact that you had passed away? Did you in your mind think, oh my God, I've died and, this is it, and, I'm kind of moving on from here? Or was it a confusion, or, can you share with our listeners kind of what your experience was?
I think I was instantly present, but with no physical boundaries to my perceptions. I was aware of the medic and the driver of the ambulance having this conversation. It's like I'm observing it from a paranormal perspective, but I could care less about the body. I didn't give it any attention. It's on that gurney, and like I said, it didn't mean anything to me at that point. So
when you came back, were you, because many of the people that I've talked to that have had this amazing experience, when they come back, they're almost, for lack of a better word, saddened that they're back. They so enjoyed where they were, or what the circumstances were, or the environment that they were, for lack of a better word, almost saddened to have come back.
Yeah, I think people get a little clearer understanding that if they look for that YouTube I mentioned earlier, a life guided by experiences, and my name, Chuck Swedrock. But the short answer to your question is I had a dentist appointment in 1980, and I joke that going to the dentist is always a little like a near-death experience, but never mind. But anyhow, the hygienist prepped me cotton rolls, rubber dams, metal clamps. I'm a captive audience. The dentist comes up and gives me a shot of Novocaine while he's waiting for it to take effect. He talks about being shopping. The day before, he met a salesman who had just returned to work after being hospitalized with a heart condition. The salesman told the dentist that while his heart was stopped, he had this experience of meeting 2 deceased relatives and the spirit form, and they introduced him to another 1 or more spirits there that he did not know their identity before this experience. So after he is resuscitated, he recovers and does the research. He authenticates this identity from the information he got in his experience. He authenticated that unknown identity spirit that he met in his near-death experience. To me, I've been a logician my whole life. My career was in computers, and logic really was the name of the game for me. So I always felt convicted by those experiences that had extra details that could be corroborated in some sense by that extra piece of information. So when he could identify that individual he met in his experience, that to me was proof of the experience, some veridical information, as I call it. Verifiable.
And this is, yeah, and this is not that unusual. I mean, the experience, I mean, it's rare, certainly, but it's not so unusual that you don't hear about it with some level of frequency, that people have had these, near death or, pre-death, or I guess whatever you want to call it. And so Chuck, what would you say to the people that say that this is just the body's normal function, the dying process? You go through these physiological changes. It's very natural. There's nothing paranormal about it. There's nothing unique about it. It's just what happens.
Well, I was involved and am involved with IONS for about 30 years. IONS has been running for close to 50 years after Raymond Moody coined that term, near-death experience. Near-death experience is in no sense a poor term because it's a spiritual experience. People have these experiences without death of the body. All varieties of experiences. The after effects are really the proof. There is a study shows 75% divorce rate after these experiences because you've got a person who changes in their personality and outlook after one of these experiences. So for 30 years in IONS, I ran groups. I was also on the board of directors of IONS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And so, I got very familiar with it from that point of view. Actually, I started their online sharing groups after COVID shut down the in-person meetings for a while. So, yeah, I've been with this for quite a while. And so to me, it's the verification is just the consistency of the message over and over and over with people who have these experiences. And they're out there now with just countless numbers of books and stories that, yeah. Can you count on them all? Some of them do that fabrication.
Well, I think that's in anything. You're going to have the naysayers, and you're going to have the ne'er-do-wells that are trying to, do something questionable about it. But I think what you'd mentioned is that there is such level of consistency, because I've been, really had the benefit of speaking with multiple people that have had this experience. And these people, again, they're not connected at all. They were never involved with this. They weren't interested in this. It was never on their radar. They just had something amazing that took place with them. And
right. When I was out of that body in that ambulance, I never lost consciousness. The body wasn't running, and it didn't have enough fluid in it to maintain a heartbeat or any consistent biological operation until it was revived. But my consciousness was consistent from one moment to the next, except it was from a different perspective or location. So, no, I think the consciousness squeezes down to get back in this body, and we have the barrier to our awareness at the higher level so that we have experience here in the physical that we wouldn't have from the spiritual with the wider perception. You think about this, without that veil, without that ignorance that's created by the veil, there can be no experience of discovery. It's only when the veil lifts that you say, oh, I see this now change in perspective. Mm-hmm. So that's the consistent message in these experiences. And when you tune in to someone telling their story, if you look for those verifiable components, like I mentioned, that to me is the essence of getting the real, the real situations, the real episodes.
Yeah, and it's giving you some, although we always say we don't actually, require evidence, but it does give you something evidentiary to say, wait a second, how could, maybe how could they know this? But that idea of hovering above the body, because I look at it almost like stages. And when we've done our research through the Tucson Paranormal Society about things related to near death experience or post death experiences, there is some consistency in this kind of hovering outside of the body type of thing, looking down on your body, seeing your body. There's a recognition that there's some kind of separation, and clearly you had that as well. And then there's some kind of, and the best way I can explain it is, as it's been explained to me, is kind of like a distancing. You see yourself kind of, moving away from that, and then at some point in time, you recognize that you're moving towards something else. Now, I don't know if you had that experience or your experience lasted that long, but it's that three stages of, I'm looking down at kind of at my body, right? And now I'm moving away from my body. We're identifying that as stage two. And then I see that I'm moving towards something. You frequently hear about, I'm moving towards the light, or I'm moving, towards family and friends, or there's that multi-stage. Now, did you have that kind of moving away from your body, seeing the light? I mean, it's almost trite because you hear it so frequently.
Well, you have to understand that I was very familiar with this phenomenon. I've been around near-death experience for a long time, and if you did look at that earlier video on YouTube, I talked about I had a paranormal experience like this after a brother committed suicide, and that definitely involved the out-of-body going to a location and terrified me initially, until I got a message from a spiritual source that it said he's not here inside his body, the body that remained after his suicide, put a higher-powered rifle under his chin. Anyhow, that's covered someplace else. And that had prepped me to understand you're getting loaded in the back of it. Oh, maybe I'll have an NDE. And I had lost enough blood, the body had nothing to give me or support. I had no attention from the body. I was gone. And the sides of the ambulance disappeared. I went to the spiritual domain, I guess you'd call it. And so my perspective is there, except I did choose to focus on the interaction between the medic and the driver. And like I said, I thought my wife was in the front seat of the ambulance. Turns out she's in the car behind me. And so that was probably my higher source. I think when you talk about the individual, if they're not prepared for it, it's really their higher self that's overcharged of, or you can call it an angel, or whatever spiritual name you want to give it. I call it higher self, that is aware and really in charge of the situation, in charge of what you will experience at that point as you make the graduated ascension. But I didn't need some of that. And I actually went to the level of not bringing back the memory of some of my experience in order to promote my life from that point forward, working with near-death experiences. I'm not working with the Veterans Association and their mental health department, trying to get them to open up to these experiences in the veterans world, which is so, they shut down to these kinds of experiences. And most vets cannot talk to their VA help. They're
oh, sure. Yeah, it makes them sound like they're crazy, or it doesn't. They don't agree. Maybe the religious underpinning, I guess, for lack of a better word, that I think is there as well. I think the veterans is a wonderful place to go, because I think they, many of them have had that experience either personally, or maybe they've had, friends associated in the military that have had that experience. That's why I think it's wonderful that your organization, makes kind of a welcoming place to do. So you head up the Eins here for the local Tucson area. Is that correct?
I'm a consultant to it. They're recreating the local alliance now. We've got a new chairperson and a secretary and a treasurer. I'm moving on to focus my work with the VA, and that I'm consulting with the local IANS group to help them get up and running. Yes. And
Now,
so,
sure. So the local group, is that events they do, is outreaches?
Yes.
They have.
Yeah, if you go to azions.org and then look at the Tucson entry, you'll see their meetings there. They're going to be the speaker meetings on the second Friday every month except for July and August. And in August, because it runs into Labor Day when the IANS group has its national conference, and July is just something you take off around here, at least some people do.
But anybody who spent any time in Arizona, certainly in Tucson, knows that July can be challenging at the least. So you're working with
and
veterans.
We're putting the Tucson IANS events online, so they're accessible anywhere, like your group here. And then on the fourth Friday, we have a sharing group, a small group. People come to the Unity Church, and we meet. We just have the annex building rooms. We're not tied to the church. It's just they're friendly to our material. Our guest speakers meet in the sanctuary, and that's where we have a camera set up, and we send that image for that meeting out to the web. So it's a very busy group, and the sharing group meets consistently, and I'm also going to have a veterans sharing group at the same time. We've got 2 rooms in their annex.
So is that your main outreach to the veterans community? Will be the sharing groups?
Yeah,
that's other types of events.
Yeah, I'm old enough I can, let some of the other go and just be focused. And that's that.
I like that. Yeah, let other people keep take up some of the work. Well, I think the organization itself is fascinating because I think and it's interesting because again, although we say that it's rare, it's also not unheard of, and I'm amazed by now. And do you think that there's just more of an acceptance of it now that, people are willing to talk about it, or maybe in the past, if it happened, they would downplay it, but now do you think society is just more comfortable, I guess, with the concept?
Well, I will say it's something you can't put back in the box, and it's only going to grow. And that's the nature. You can just look back from the 50 years of IANS and now how prolific these books and these talks and these groups are. These groups are international. There was a meeting for Mother's Day early yesterday morning, and they had people from Sweden or whatever. I mean, it's, it's reached the planet, and it won't go back in the box. And that's why I'm knocking on the door to veterans to get them to reopen to it. They have actually, I really recommend people find the work by Dr. Alan Botkin because it started in the veterans world. ALLENBOTKIN. And he came up with the process using EMDR without direction that induce after-death communication for soldiers that he was working with. So after 8 years doing it the traditional way, he expanded it. He did it for 12 more years with tremendous success, 75% success rate, which is unheard of in that psychological arena. But so you basically forced him out of the military, and so that's great. That was a good thing because now his work is available to the world. And if you look up Alan Botkin and his website, he's trained hundreds of therapists in doing this all across, the planet, essentially.
Sure. So, but I think it is. I think it is a global issue. Every culture has it. Every group has it. Every religion has it. It's not limited to any. There's no specificity to it. I think every person on the face of the earth has access to this amazing experience. And, you know, and again, I think that it's something that globally we'll talk about, because it really addresses the issue, what happens when. And I think regardless of whether you are religious, non-religious, doesn't make any difference. Your culture, your creed, your gender doesn't make, I think everyone has that begging question, what happens, what's next? This can't be all that it is. And I think that's the really compelling thing that brings such interest to this. And, Chuck, I applaud your work and the work of your group. And I love the fact that you work with veterans. They, a lot of times have the main brunt of it. So how would somebody get a hold of you? I mean, if they're interested in you, and by the way, for our listeners, you can always reach out to us here at the Tucson Paranormal Society. We'll make sure that we can connect you up with Chuck. But Chuck, how would somebody get a hold of you, get a hold of IANS?
Well, IANS, clearly their website is IANS.org, or the sharing groups are at ISGO, IANS Sharing Groups Online.IANS.org. And those you can get through their website. So that will happen there. My email is chuck.swedrock, SWEDROCK @gmail.com.
Excellent. And again, if anybody wants to connect up with you, Chuck, and for whatever reason didn't write that down, they're welcome to reach out to us. We can certainly get them in that right direction. So I always say that, I always run out of time before I run out of questions. I still have half my questions. Chuck, it's kind of a parting statement to our listeners. I guess what would you like maybe if in the last minute or two here, want to share with the listeners we have about, this world, this environment, and the great work that you're doing?
Okay, what comes to me is that we all have some level of clouded awareness for our consciousness while we're operating from the body in its most, healthy state. Now, you can look at people who have these experiences. They've been, dementia, Alzheimer's, all the way up to the end, and then have clarity in the last couple of days before they transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
sure.
Just understand that this is a temporary phenomena, and that we're with neighbors who are at different levels of ability for taking in this information. So love everyone and do not judge. They're doing the best they can. It's too easy to be critical of another, but they may be ignorant from whatever reason for their particular life. And there are those that will be more advanced than I am, or we are. So it's try to eliminate judgment, implement love only, and that means letting go of conditional love. Oh, I'll be good to you if you. That's a partial love. You need a full love that says, you're human, I'm human, and we don't see eye to eye on this. That's okay. We can go our separate ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I think that's a great, it's interesting how many of the, I go back into the paranormal run, how many of the paranormal things seem to converge at that really positive message, which is, take care of one another, love one another, appreciate one another. We're all kind of on this journey and, together but separate. And I think that's a great parting comment. So thank you so much, Chuck. Again, it was an absolute privilege to do this.
Yeah, one more closing note on that is do not judge somebody who doesn't have a positive experience. There are hellish experiences, but that's temporary. That's for their lesson or their need to grow or whatever. It is not an eternal damnation thing. Just don't judge.
No, I think that's a great way to take it, because you're right. Sometimes we hear negative things out there in the world. So again, Chuck, absolute privilege in doing this. Thank you so much for joining us. And for those that are listening, again, it's an absolute privilege for us to do this for our listeners. Bringing amazing paranormal content to the world is really one of the goals of Tucson Paranormal Society. So again, thank you, Chuck. Thank you, listeners. And, go out, experience something amazing. Bye-bye, everybody.